That's quite all right. All right, I'm making more copies. This is kind of agenda that Carol put up, kind of a guide for us to start the meeting. So essentially, we'll start, we'll do our little view and presentation, whatever we have to say, and then we'll invite you guys to do the thing you want to do, and we'll open it up. I don't know. I don't know if you had one. Did you have some kind of presentation or something? Okay.
So we're gonna follow this.
Somewhere. It was right here. All right, so we'll start this workshop. It's July 20th, 2022, 6 o'clock. I'd like to welcome everybody that's here tonight. The Indian Island Company, the Big Cumberland Land Trust, P. Slavinsky. Do we have a DP? No, okay. And then thank you all for coming. So we'll start with just a brief description of what our goals are, what the Board of Selectmen is looking for as far as what to get out of this. Obviously, no decisions are made tonight, just a workshop. And then we'll hand it over to the Indian Island Company to do their presentation. And then I don't know if the Big Cumberland Land Trust has any presentation or if you want to speak or something. So once we go through, then it'll be your turn, and then Pete Slavinsky's here for questions or clarifications. So let's start. So I'd like to set everybody to have like rule 15 minutes. I said 20 in the last meeting. So so to kind of keep our presentations a little tight. People talking at discussions when it's public time, 2 to 3 minutes, please. So that we can just move this along and everybody gets a chance to talk and try to keep the meeting at a timely manner, so we can all go home sometimes tonight. All right. So I'm going through, this is something that Carol White brought up, the type of, not really an agenda, it's more or less kind of guide for this meeting. So I'll start with, there's been a lot of material put on the town website in preparation for this workshop. I hope most of everybody had a chance to at least look at it. There was the Town of Big Island sea level rise assessment done in 2016 by J.P. Cog. Slide from Pete Slavinsky, October 21st, presentation showing limitations of federal state funding areas. Marine flood hazard map, sand dune boundary map, sea level rise, storm surge scenario map, coastal structure and dune crest inventory and overtopping potential map, living shoreline decision support tools map, 1999 conservation easement, 2002 public access easement and road maintenance agreement between the town of Cumberland and Indian Island Company. Indian Island Company background and consideration presentation. Ed Ballard's assessment of the Indian site visit with the main DEP on 5/11. Baker's design consultant, Indian Point resiliency study, AKA emergency shorefront repair. Indian Point resiliency access presentation done on April 6th, 2022 by Barney Baker from GTI. So there was a lot of information. I don't know if everybody got a chance to look at it, but we'll see most of it tonight, or at least discuss most of it tonight. So our goals, you want to do that? Okay. All right. So our town goals: to maintain public access to the hook and Willow Big, which due to climate change issues such as sea level rise requires an adaptive approach. We want to work collaboratively with Indian Island and CCLT to find potential solutions. As a town, we need to be consistent with our overall commitment to how we address all coastal issues our community is facing. An example are erosions at Chandler's, the big one, the improvement on the stone wall. We expect to be fiscally responsible in spending taxpayers' money. We need to utilize all available resources, example, Maine Geological Survey mapping. So you have it as Carol or Pete.
Oh.
So is that just, you want to talk about that?
Sure. So I don't know if everybody got the sound. You guys got this, and I hope that the projection map sort of in the live format.
Might have to
For
talk a little
That's
louder.
not going to happen. But I think the first, the first thing that the town wanted to present was the 2016 sea level rise study, and the relevant information on that, if you look at the second page, is the assessment of the roads on the Indian Island road being the most vulnerable road that was identified. And so it's called the Indian Point Road on this particular map, but it's based on sea level rise projections and the different types of scenarios. For example, highest annual tide in 1 foot, how much road, linear feet of road would be lost. It starts off at, even now at a high, the highest astronomical tide, there's still, it can overtop the road. But as we move up and sort of, not surprisingly, sea level rise projections, you can see that quite a bit of the road is vulnerable to flooding due to sea level rise. And so, in fact, the Indian Point Road is the most vulnerable road on the island. And there are a couple others, that Jenks Road and Venice Cove, which, interestingly, are also beach access roads. So this study was done back in 2016, so we knew about the challenges in terms of potential road access as climate change and sea level rise continues. The next map that's in your packet from the town side, and I think I might just hand it over to Pete at this point. So the next one is really, it's described as Jenks Landing, Waldo Point, Unit 805C. And this is the map. I think we actually took this from Pete's presentation in October of 2021. And this is a map of the coastal barrier resource systems that exist in the town of Shabbat. And Pete, maybe you could give us a brief sort of summary of what a coastal barrier resource system is. And then we can go through the other maps there's a FEMA map and the rest are sort of main geological survey products.
Okay, so hi everyone, Pete Stilinski for GEL's Maine Geological Survey. So the coastal barrier resource area maps are federally designated areas where it's known that dynamic processes are occurring. And if there are limits placed on the spending of federal funds for a range of different activities because of the identification of these areas as naturally occurring dune/beach areas that have a big importance in terms of their habitat, their dynamic nature, and things like that. The state of Maine has also designated through Title 38, Section 1905, Maine Legislature, coastal barrier resource systems. And they pretty much mirror the federal designations, which are done by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. But there are a few different ones. So on Chesapeake Island, there are 3 systems. It's all called Jenks Landing Waldo Point, which is a little misleading. But the mapping that's available from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's CBRA mapper, or Coastal Barrier Resource Area mapper, shows, you can see on the right-hand side, A05C, that's Roses. And then you can see Jenks Landing / Sandy Point on the lower right-hand corner, and then Indian Point in the lower left-hand corner of that same map. So what that does is it places pretty strict limits on the spending of either federal funds, and because it's a state designation, or state funds on certain activities in those areas. It doesn't mean that things cannot be done with private funds. It just means that state and federal funds shouldn't be spent in those areas because it's recognized that they're very dynamic areas, undergo a lot of changes, and have been designated as areas where you also can't buy flood insurance. So the idea with the CBR, my understanding of the CBRA mapping is that the idea was to designate those areas that are, known to be very, very dynamic, and hence the restrictions of the spending of state or federal funds. So that's what that map shows.
And then the next
Oh,
map.
you want me to go
So,
through the
yeah,
rest
you
of
can
the
go through the next. So the next map
Sure.
is just a close up, and we were talking. So we can provide links to these maps, but the next map is just a close up of Indian Point.
Yep. So I'll walk you through the rest of the maps real quick, just to give you the context of what we're looking at. And I have these 2 small ones, but I think I know what I'm looking at.
That's the thing on.
So if you flip the page to these little 2 maps.
Can I just interrupt you
Yes.
real quick? So,
Do we have other copies of those maps?
no, so this workshop, the packet that is on the website that put up has all of this information. Indian Island brought some presentation information that they're gonna be sharing, but we don't have a copy to the public for all of this. Copies were distributed to the people that were part of the workshop today here, so that's why you might not be. It's on the town website, right on the homepage, right underneath the calendar, it says Indian Island Workshop, and all of the documents that are gonna be talked about today are all there.
Great. So I'm mostly talking to the board.
Right.
So the on the left-hand side is what we call the effective Maine flood hazard map. So those are the map that has been adopted by FEMA and the community. It shows the effective flood hazard boundaries. Basically, the entire area of Indian Point is kind of hard to see, but it is designated as partially a V zone out in front of it, and then an A zone along the whole thing. What that means is, if you're designated a V zone, that means that the area is expected in a 1% storm, or the storm that has a 1% chance of occurring in a given year. It's also called the 100-year storm. You're going to have a certain elevation of water that's reached, and I can't read, unfortunately, on that map what that elevation is. And then on top of that, you have waves that are 3 feet or greater. Okay? And an A zone is static flood zone. So those are areas where you have wave heights of 1.5 feet or smaller. So think of it as a less dynamic, less dangerous area. On the right-hand side is the preliminary flood map that FEMA has issued for Cumberland County and also the town of Shahidi Island. And at Indian Point, you can see that the entire area there is in the flood zone. And this is not zoomed in close enough for me to be able to actually see what the flood zones are.
It's the zone and the base flood elevation, 15.
Okay, so what that means is in a 1% storm, water with waves of 3 feet or greater is going to reach up to an elevation of 15 feet. It's not mean low or low water. So the tide charts are, when you look at the tide chart, that's referenced to mean low or low water. The elevations referenced on these maps, which is what FEMA uses, is tied to a vertical datum called NAVD. There's about a 5-foot difference between the two. So 15 feet NAVD is about 20 feet mean low or low water. Okay, so just to give you an idea of how high that is. The entire system is overtopped in a 1% storm.
Roughly how many feet?
I have no idea.
It's on Barney, it's actually on Barney's plan, show the base flood elevation
Yeah.
cross sections in there, they're,
I think it's 4 feet or something like that.
yeah, 4 or 5 feet
Yeah.
above any of the existing.
So that's what these maps show. That's existing flood risk, not including any sea level rise. If you flip over to the red map, this one. This is, so the Maine Geological Survey maps the dune boundaries of the state of Maine for the Department of Environmental Protection. DEP regulates dune areas as either a D1 or a frontal dune. So that's the most dynamic, think of it, the most oceanfront area of dune that has a lot of dynamic processes. It sees overwash on a regular basis. It sees large waves overtopping it, things like that. So the entire area of Indian Point, as shown in this red area, is mapped as a D1 or a frontal dune. There's also what's called a back dune or D2. Those are areas that are more protected and are usually behind a D1. So sometimes you can have a very large frontal dune, dune crest, and then a back dune. So think of Sandy Point. You've got a little frontal dune crest and then a large area of back dune where you've got dune ground, oakweed, and all that stuff. So that's what a back dune system is. Indian Point is all basically a narrow spit barrier, we call it, that connects from a headland from an island to a headland. So that's all very, very narrow and very low. So it's all mapped as what we call D1, which is the highest risk area. If you flip over to the next page,
1.6 and 3.1.
yeah, what we're looking at on this page, on the left-hand side, are what we call sea level rise scenarios. So the way we develop these is we don't put them on top of the 1% flood, which would be really, really, just inundate everything. What this is on top of is what we call the highest astronomical tide. So it's the highest tide you can expect over a 19-year period. That's related to the tidal data method, it's called. So it's a predicted tide over a 19-year period. So what this is showing on the left-hand side is 1.6 feet of sea level rise on top of that highest astronomical tide. So this is not including storms. It's just pretty much what you call daytime flooding. So we reach within a couple inches of the highest astronomical tide about 6 to 8 times a year. They're your king tides, your big tides. Like we had some pretty big tides last week. So that plus 1.6 feet will be your picture on the left. And on the right-hand side is that highest astronomical tide plus 3.9 feet of sea level rise, which is the amount of sea level rise that the state of Maine it has adopted as part of its Maine Mill Weight process by the year 2100. Okay, so that's what it's asking communities to think about by the year 2100. The 1.5 feet is something that the state of Maine has adopted for the planning year of 2050. The next page has a lot of, it shows Indian Point with a lot of red and yellow and orange dots on it. This page. This is something that we've developed for Cumberland and York counties called the Coastal Structure and Dune Crest Inventory and Overtopping Protection. What it does is it picks the highest elevation of the existing dune crest that is there. Okay, so think of the highest point on the dune. It picks that elevation and then compares it with the FEMA preliminary base flood elevations. All right, so somebody asked how much higher the water would be during that. So what it does is basically taking that FEMA base flood elevation and subtracting it from the dune crest, so you get what we call a freeboard above that. And then, so the red dots are showing that there's more than, the dark red dots show that it's more than 5 feet below that 100-year FEMA base flood elevation. The orange dots are showing that it's between 3 and 4 feet. And I'll call them the yellow, the lightest dots that you see on there are showing that at that location, the dune crest is between 1 and 2 feet below the FEMA base flood elevation. Okay, so it gives you an idea of what the overtopping potential would be in a 1% slope.
So to clarify, the red is the worst. That's where it's going to be the
Correct.
most water over the dune crest.
Correct. There'd be 5 feet or more of water at that location. And then the last one in this packet that I'm seeing is this one. It's called the Living Shoreline Decision Support Tool. This is something that we developed in our office that takes into account a variety of different factors. Fetch, which is the distance that a wind can blow over water and create waves. Aspect, so what direction is the shoreline facing? Because vegetation typically grows best on the southeast or southwest facing aspects as opposed to northeast or northwest facing aspects. What's there in terms of the landward shoreline type? Is it a dune? Is it a marsh? Is it a rocky ledge? If you turn and look seaward, what's there? Is it a mud flat? Is it a sandy beach? Is it a rocky ledge? And all these are factors that we take into account when we're thinking about the suitability of the shoreline for what we call living shoreline solutions. So that is, can you mimic what's happening in nature by building the same thing that's there? Think of dune restoration. It's a living shoreline type. You can do living shoreline applications adjacent to coastal bluffs as well, things like that. So what this tool is basically telling you is in those areas that are green, those are areas that are highly suitable for living shoreline types. It doesn't take into account, for instance, though, how much erosion might be occurring at that location. It just says, based on these factors that we looked at, this stretch of shoreline would be suitable or not suitable for living shoreline. Okay. Typically, if you're looking at deep bathymetry up to a rocky ledge, you're probably not going to be trying to establish some kind of vegetation at that location because there's none there naturally. But if you're looking at a shoreline and you see an extensive marsh, you see an extensive dune, you see a mud flat, you see a sandy beach with a dune behind it, those are areas that nature has put living shorelines into. So that means we could probably try to replicate that process. So that's what this tool is telling you. It's not anything other than a planning tool to say it's probably suitable or it's not suitable in a certain location. So that's about it. And I think that's those are the maps.
Thank you.
Oh, can I ask a question?
Yeah, I'm gonna say if there are any questions, I'm happy to.
Yeah, this last graphic that you showed is probably the most that I was raising questions about because the green on the side of the road where the erosion is so bad is where the big waves and the big energy is coming in. I've seen your Living Shorelines presentations, and I can imagine them holding up to this kind of energy that comes into this part of it.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. That's a good question. And the way I always think about it is what's there now? And if there is a natural feature that's there, that means nature can support it or has been able to support it in the past. So if we went back and looked at maps from 50 years ago, I bet you there'd probably be a dune and a beach there. It's going away because of increased storminess. It's going away because of sea level rise and all those factors. So, but the way I typically think about the use of living shorelines is if you look at what's there now, that's what you want to try to replicate if you're going to establish a quote living shoreline. There are green approaches to living shoreline, which is say just planting dune grass, just bringing in sand. There are green gray approaches, which is related to maybe you put some kind of nearshore sill in, or like putting something offshore there, a kelp farm, something like that, mixed with dune restoration would be a green gray approach. And then what we call gray approaches is like putting riprap down along the whole stretch of the beach. The problem with placing seawalls in dynamic environments like this, as you have seen with what's happening there, is wherever that seawall terminates, you're going to have increased erosion. And that's what's happening now. And in fact, the wall that's there isn't adequate in any way to protect the road. It's being outflanked, and it's actually, I was just down there today, it's actually exposing marsh surface that is right at the wall. So that's telling me that a couple hundred years ago, there was a marsh. You know how there's a marsh on the backside of that? That marsh was where the wall is now. And with sea level rise that has occurred over the last couple hundred years, and also with coastal storms, that marsh moves over time, and the barrier, the dune and the marsh behind it move over time inland in response to sea level rise. That's the natural way they move. So that marsh that is exposed now is telling you that at one point the beach was a couple hundred feet seaward than where it is now. So it's really interesting to see from a geological. I got really excited. Rob can attest to that.
But in this case, the movement is not, I mean, you refer to it as shoreward or moving
Yeah.
inland. In this case, inland is toward the cove that's on the other
Yes,
side.
yes. So what these systems want to do, if there was nothing there, what these systems do in response to sea level rise is any beach system. You think of them as a tank tread. They are here at time one, and after sea level rise occurs, so you've got the marsh on this side, you've got the dune on this side. Maybe I can use paper, that's a little bit easier. You've got the dune over here, and think of the marsh on this side. So what happens at time one, this, through the process of what we call overwash and storms, this gets overwashed and it pushes this whole system in the landward direction. So that at time two, you have the marsh here still behind it, but the dune that's here now is over what was once marsh. Okay. So I call it the tank tread concept. It literally rolls over itself in a landward direction. So that's just going on with what you just said. So. Thank you. Mark?
Pete, did I hear you correctly that you said a green/gray approach would be something that might be able to be considered or permissible?
You know, I mean, I'm not going to talk about how permittable it is because I'm not a regulator. Green-gray approaches at the right location certainly could work. The issue is developing a design that minimizes impact onto the beach and dune that's there now. And one of the main questions associated with whether or not to spend funds on, say, a system like this is, what are your expectations out of the property? What is the realistic future for the property given sea level rise and coastal storms? And then who pays for it? It's one of the last ones. Green-gray approaches can be very effective in the right locations. They typically cost a decent amount of money, just like gray approaches cost a decent amount of money.
I understand. And I also agree with and have heard the same opinion that you brought up about placing riprap or a man-made seawall barrier. Where that barrier ends, it tends to change that area that is not.
Yeah. Yeah, the seawalls are very good at protecting infrastructure. They're not good at protecting resources.
Yeah. And so you probably wouldn't be able to speak to whether, would a green approach be permissible, in your opinion, more than anything else in an area like this? I know it's a tough question.
You mean just for straight green?
Replanting, I think I share some.
It's if you can do it with a very, very minimal permit. In an area like this that's currently so dynamic, I don't think you'd have much success.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I walked down there this morning.
Yeah.
And I
So
looked at the area.
what's currently happening on both sides of Indian Point is on the south side, you're getting a lot of erosion here where the wall is and up to right about here where the road is at its narrowest. And actually on the southeast side, southwest side, you're also getting a lot of erosion. That dune there is very scarped. So scarp is a vertical feature in the dune that you can see. So that tells me that from when you get your southwesterly winds, which we get a lot of, it's getting scarped out because of wave energy along there. That sand is going to the spit, or the point. I'm assuming that's what's called the point. But anyway, to me, this the sand spit. So right now, sand is going from this side and being congregated here. This dune is growing. So it's growing seaward because it's getting all the sand from both sides right now. It's very hard to change sand transport directions.
Yeah.
So green infrastructure, could work if you could bring in a lot of sand and build this whole area out, but it'd be very difficult to do, and it could potentially be limited in terms of the amount of time that you're getting out of that.
Yeah.
Because the system is very, very dynamic, and I don't know the history of this area, but anecdotally, I spoke with somebody on the beach today who said they've been visiting this area for 5 generations. And over the last 4 years, it's the most erosion we've ever seen. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it just goes to show it's like what has happened over like the last, 50, 80, 100 years isn't necessarily what's happening now or what might happen in the future. So traditionally, as geologists, we look back and say, well, that's what's happened. This is what's going to happen. We can use that to tell us what's going to happen in the future. You can't always do that.
Thank you.
So if the board doesn't mind, Ian Island doesn't mind, and,
Plan for-
thank you. Doesn't mind, since the topic's fresh in the minds, and maybe there's some people in the public, or you have questions, I think it'd be a good time to open it up to see if people have questions to Pete.
Yeah, please, if you have a question, ask. I'm a resource. We're here to- If I don't know something, I'll tell you I don't know.
So is there anybody in the public that has, Ted?
Well, my one question is, this is interesting stuff, and I'm just very glad to see it today. The company definitely is going to be needing to make some decisions about more specific plans, and the town may or may not, depending upon its decisions, be doing that too. Does your organization help people who are trying to figure out more detailed plans about what to do, or are you just?
Yeah, we're resources more for municipalities. We have given general guidance to say homeowner associations and things like that, but we don't do designs. You're gonna have to, so there's a fine line at the state level of being helpful and being a consultant. And we're not paid to be consultants, we're paid to be helpful to the general public and to municipalities and things like that. So we try to stay away from developing designs and things like that. We can float general ideas, and we're always a sounding board. If you're interested in saying, this is what our consultants say, what do you think? We can provide feedback on that, but we try to draw the line between giving general information on hazards, giving general information on best management practices, and actually coming up with designs and building things. We don't do that. That's what the consultant role is for. You're welcome.
Any questions from the public?
I have some experience with the Great Green, and I was wondering about, and just throwing this out there, about the dynamic system. But just in case the energy, could it be a possibility that, I know that you don't know how the system necessarily will react, but piles of rubble, actual ions that would slow down energy.
Yeah, those have been implemented in other locations. One of the issues I think about in terms of that is how big they need to be to do that, and then where you would place them. So right now, I know people like to walk out on the spit at low tide. They're connected to the 2 islands, and then there's another spit to the east that people walk out on also. They would probably have to go in some of those areas, those rubble mounds that you're talking about. So one thing to balance is, putting those in versus public access using those areas. You'd have to definitely have a good sense of how big those structures need to be. Do they need to be exposed at you know, where, how far up the beach profile can put them? Can they be closer to the beach and be exposed at low tide, or do they have to be farther out? I'm not even gonna get into the regulatory aspect of that because they're not generally looked kindly upon by the regulatory community. But a near shore reef, termed it something like that, could potentially help in a situation like this. It would just have to be designed properly and placed in the right location. And given how much, you know, how much the tide range is at that location, I would think that you would have to have something that is going to be exposed, or at least partially exposed at the higher tides. So it would have to be a pretty large structure. But things like that are used on a fairly regular basis, especially along the Gulf Coast, to break up wave energy from hurricanes, and also to reestablish habitat behind it. So a lot of times what they'll do is they'll build what these things are called nearshore sills, what they're called. They'll build them, and sometimes it's rock down there. A lot of the times what they'll do is they'll create oyster reefs. And that works down there because they don't have, you know, 6 hours of tide cycle where things freeze. A little harder to do in areas like here because oysters will die. You can talk about that. But oysters will die if they're exposed in the cold for 6 hours. I don't know. It's simple. But then behind that, what they'll do is then they'll recreate marsh habitat or something like that. You could not do marsh habitat here. It's way too dynamic, way too energetic. But yeah, so that's a good question. Okay.
What is the effectiveness of health funds?
You know,
Being a fair.
yeah, I don't know, to be honest. I know there are some pilot studies that are being done by University of New England down the Hill Beach area. And out west, they've done a bunch of kelp farms out on the West Coast. Because if you've ever been to the coast of California, you can see during the summer, the winds pick up all from the offshore on towards the land. Same thing, onshore winds. You can see all these big jumping seas offshore, and then it hits the kelp beds, and then it smooths out, and all surfers hang out just behind the kelp beds because the waves are nice and clean right there and small. So they are effective. I just don't know enough about like the design of them or anything like that to comment on how effective they are here. I don't know. Also, I think kelp needs to be underwater at all tides, so it would have to be very far offshore because of how high the tide range is at that location. So I mean, more than a couple hundred yards offshore.
Well, we do have some help growing.
Yeah. Okay. So, hold on. Yeah, they're on the other side. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Just a point about that, commercial growing of kelp in Maine is pretty much exclusively between October 15th and May 15th. So the effectiveness for wave attenuation wouldn't start until that kelp that was planted October 15th got large enough to have impact.
Right.
Probably somewhere in January, and the positive impact would go away as soon as it's harvested.
Right.
So a big chunk of the worst part of the season might benefit from that, but certainly wouldn't provide any benefit beyond that growing season. For commercially grown kelp, if the kelp is being grown strictly for wave attenuation, then that situation is
Oh,
To the dots on the last chart, relating to the last.
sure.
To take into account the first charts with
Take into account what?
your first several charts with the high water.
No, they're simply based on nearshore bathymetry. So if it's really deep, right up to the shoreline, you're not going to be able to build a living shoreline. It takes into account fetch, which is the distance, of course, with the water, the wind blows over water. Takes into account aspect, so things that are southerly facing are better for planting vegetation. Takes into account landward shoreline type. So if you turn around and look landward, what's there? Is it a 50-foot bluff, or is it a low-lying dune, which is what you have here? So that's dunes are good things because that's a natural resource. What is the seaward shoreline type? So if you turn and look seaward, what's there? Is it a beach, a mud flat, which are good things for living shorelines, a marsh, things like that, or is it ledge, which is not good for trying to grow something?
But my question is a living shoreline approach appropriate?
That's a very good question. That would have to be taken into account by an engineer in terms of design. Good engineers that work extensively with living shorelines could probably build living shoreline almost anywhere. So that's a tough question to answer. Sea level rise is going to be overtopping a wall that went in here. For instance, you'd have to build it to 17 or 18 feet NAVD to have it probably be effective for regular wave energy. Building a wall here, you'll still get overtopped in 100 years. But at least the designs that I saw that Mr. Baker, Bonnie Baker designed consultants at the time, who's now with GDI, what he showed, you still have about 3 or 4 feet of water on top of that, and that's not going to count. So, yeah, but that's a great question, and something that needs to be factored into whatever's done anywhere on Shanigga Island or anywhere else. It's not just what are you designing for the current day. It's we need to think about what's going to be there in 30 to 50 years. Also.
I've noticed that over the last year or so, the bankings have gone away very quickly. I mean, when it started to go, it just went, and it started to go. And today, when I was down there, I had so much more from 2 weeks ago, a month ago. Is there a way to stop it and where it is now? Because we're not even going to be able to walk down here in another year by the way it looks in that area. The first 2 areas that are starting to eat away. Does it hurt the environment to build something right there to stop it there?
Yeah, it would. You would stop the erosion at that location, but what walls do? So I don't know if you've walked that beach and walked it from the west side to the east side, but the beach elevation actually on the west side of the beach is much higher than in front of the walls. So as you walk down towards the walls, you get lower and lower and lower, and such that you can't walk there high top. You can't. The water is in contact with the walls. So that's the problem with bulkheads, especially. A little bit less with riprap, but they also take up a lot of space and do the same thing. So what happens when you put in a solid structure in a dynamic environment is, I like using props, as you can tell, is, I'm trying to do the best angle. So you put in a solid structure, so let's talk to you, you put in a solid structure, what happens is, this is the sand level of time when the structure is put in. When waves interact with this structure during storms, sand moves from areas of high energy to low energy. So if waves are smacking this wall and you see wave energy shooting up the wall, that same wave energy is shooting down. So sand is going to move away from this location to another location where it's less energetic. So that's one thing. So what happens over time is that this sand level drops adjacent to that wall, such that the footings of the wall get uncovered, and then you have to remove the wall or fix it and drive deeper piles, whatever. But the beach in front of it will never be there. It will always go away. So the wall actually results in a loss of public access over time. The other problem with potentially putting a wall in at that location and in other very dynamic locations is, if this is the end of the wall, wave energy hits this wall, but it also wraps around here. So it comes in and hits here and wraps around. This is why at the ends of some of the walls, you have the worst erosion that occurs in this location. So that means you have to build the wall longer and longer and longer and longer until the whole shoreline is a wall, which in an area like this, which is a frontal dune system and also a coastal barrier resource system, might not be the most wise way of spending money. But that's for other folks to decide. That's not for me to opine about. I'm just trying to give you the science.
The wall that was there before was built in 1905 or something, or 1903.
03?
1903, it was there for quite a few years.
Yeah. Yeah, it has been. Yeah. So, so, you know, in terms of emergency actions to protect the road, that would be a question for DEP. Yeah, there is I think it's called 480W or something like that. It's an emergency protection clause in the Natural Resources Protection Act, which for critical road infrastructure allows municipalities to dump temporary materials, riprap, put it in bulkhead, things like that, protect it temporarily while a long-term fix is being developed. Whether or not this area would qualify for that, I don't know.
Those first two areas that have eaten away so much, are they in that same, position, you can't get government funds? Isn't that below that area that?
They're technically in that area, yes. So I don't know how funds were used in, was it post 2007?
Because
So the boundary extends all the way, the boundary of the coastal area resource extends all the way up to the Rocky Ledge.
Up to the Rocky Ledge,
The Rocky Ledge, you know, you can see the old discharge pipe coming.
where
in.
that pipe is.
Yeah,
Oh,
so the
yeah, yeah.
boundary is quite a ways up.
That's on this map.
Yeah, so if you look at that map,
Not that it's this
it's on the, it's on the, it's on.
You want to ask who?
I just had a different idea for Bev's answer. If you take two things that he has talked about and relate it to your question, think of allowing that dune to move naturally the way a dune does. And think of the path that you would walk down being on top of that dune, and that path moving with the dune as it moved over the years. That would create a walking path on top of the slowly moving dune until such time as sea level is overtopping it too much to be able to walk on it. But it would give a walking path access perhaps a longer life than some of the other solutions that we've talked about. Does that make any sense?
It does, yeah, it does, it does. The other thing to think about, I don't know if this has been discussed, but the other thing to think about is, we're talking mostly about the south side of the system. Putting something on the south side of the system doesn't solve the fact that it's still going to get flooded from the north side, the marsh side, because it's so low lying.
So a couple more questions and then we gotta move on.
I just had a quick question about whether sandbars ever go away, like over time.
They move.
So would there be a risk that you could walk across it in the future? I'm just wondering.
It depends. That sandbar has been pretty consistent over time. It's shifted in its location and exactly where it goes. And sometimes its elevation moves from one side to another. It's all dependent upon storm events. It's all dependent upon, mostly storm events, rather. Anecdotally, one of the things that, I'm going off my tangent, sorry. What was your question was about sandbar?
No, I was just interested because it's a right of way to Wilshire and
Oh,
I'm
right,
is it always
Right,
gonna
right, right.
be? Can you always get there in the future?
Probably not, because so as sea level rises, it's not just the high tides that go higher, it's also the low tides get higher. So think of everything as just going like this. So when the sea level rises to a certain point, I have not done this analysis, I don't know what it is. That low water, so think you've got, we showed maps about highest annual tide, but mean low water is also going up. So if mean low water gets to a certain point, you probably would not be able to walk across. I just don't know when that's going to be. We haven't analyzed how mean lower water, is going to be impacting some of these sandy areas. Right? Yes.
What do you think is a viable solution to be able to?
I mean, I know you guys have a lot to balance here. Public access to the boathouse, and all these things. My own personal opinion on it is this is an area that isn't critical to the functionality of Sheboygan. If we were talking about a road that connected one portion of the island to another portion of the island and was going to cut off 10 or 15 houses, I'd say be protected. My opinion, again, is this is a perfect location where you allow nature to take its course over time. You use that resource for as long as you can. You use the access to the boathouse for as long as you can. You develop other plans for the public on how to access the area there. Maybe it's moving the parking lot up. you know, you use the existing one there for as long as you can, but honestly, there's not much, you can't really use that now, it's shut down. And it's a perfect location to show, in my mind, how a community adapts to changing climate conditions. Sea level rise is not going to slow down anytime soon. It's not going to stop in 2100. Our maps go out to 2100, but it's not going to stop in 2100. So I think this is a perfect example where the community thinks about, you know, the word that everybody kind of hates to use, which is retreat, or let things go as long as you can. Possibly think about, you know, helping things along with some living shorelines, or maybe doing some things here or there, but not necessarily trying to armor something that's so dynamic and is going to be changing continually into the future. So that's my opinion.
All right. Last one.
It's hard to imagine the living shoreline, seashells and baskets, burlap bags,
Yeah.
sand. I sat in on your presentations for the last 2 years from Seattle. My husband and I have, and I just don't see it there on that south-facing shoreline. So it's hard for us to imagine when you say, let's do these things, that it's actually going to work.
Yeah, I don't think those kind of applications would work with that application.
They don't, and so I would have,
What?
I have a question for public access. It's vehicle public access or walking public access? We'll always have walking public access, but we won't have vehicle public access. So that's a clarification to me in this goal section. Are we vehicle or are we public walking?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, I think that's one of the things we're discussing. So, I mean, I think that's one of the things, and we won't always have walking access. I mean, over time, Bill is right. I mean, you know, there'll be a time when we won't be able to walk the entire beach front. I think that's the case, but I do think the question comes down to vehicle versus foot access.
Right.
Yes, Paul.
I would also add to Phyllis's question, the question, vehicle access versus pedestrian access, but relative to vehicles, access from where to where. So we've currently moved in this temporary scenario, vehicle access from down at the old 5 parking spots to up to the top of the hill. But I would ask us to consider whether there are other potential locations for vehicle access to terminate, and then relate that to the best access to the dune that goes to Little Shabig, not the dune that goes, or the dune that goes to Little Shabig and the dune that goes to the boathouse. So look at both ends of the spectrum.
All right, so I don't want to stop this, but we need to move on.
This is a meeting.
So, I mean, it's good to talk. No. So, read what Carol wrote, as we move forward, keep in mind, the easement calls for maintaining the road and parking, not stabilization. The shoreline or rebuilding the seawall, etc. Or in 2002, sea level rise was not in anyone's radar. 2016 sea level rise study identifies this road as vulnerable to SLR or storm surge, public safety issues, access limitations, exit all over the island and outer islands where there is no vehicular access. This can be considered like Deer Point. This is a private road. It is important to continue to be honest, transparent, and with the community and keep an open mind to all potential solutions. So as that, I'll hand it over to Indian Island. Indian Point.
Thank you very much. We spent the first hour on sort of a science level conversation.
Yeah, I do apologize.
No, I think that's
good.
great. But now we're going to talk about sort of a real world instance of those realities and the choices that we have to face, which is what we think is really the central question at any time. The me just make sure that people have, there's a presentation that looks like this, and then there's a background set of documents that look like this. There are more copies over here if anybody wants them. I'm Ted Ballard, for those of you that I don't already know. Phyllis Brunner and her husband David Brunner, who is that mastermind in the back, have been the people from the Indian Island that have been most closely involved in trying to figure out how to understand and how to address this. Phyllis is the president of the Association of Member Organization of Users of Indian Point. She also knows lots and lots of people, and she's a licensed engineer, which is very handy sometimes. I've been asked to be the spokesperson for the company, which is the owner of the property. And that's largely because I've been involved and because I know about the history about how did we get to here from the 20th century on. What I'd like to do is to spend about 10, 12 minutes on the 7 slides, the next 8 slides. Talking about, from our perspective, sort of what are we dealing with now and what choices do we have to figure out how to make? And then pause and see what questions that you would have to ask of Phyllis and David and me about this material. So starting with the agenda, we wanted to just sort of review the site itself, talk about the existing agreements that frame whose responsibility for what, briefly touch on the state of the road, which is the real world instance of what we've been talking about. Our goals for this workshop, and what we see is the 3 paths that are on the table tonight. And then open it up for questions. Turn to slide 3. Slide 3 is a site plan that actually the runner prepared, simply to show sort of what's where on Indian Point. And it shows the contour of the hook and the cove and the sandbar. It shows the alignment of the road and where the public access point is. And it also shows the property boundaries, because you have the road not only goes through the Indian Island Company, but it also there are 4 other property owners at the upper section of the road, through whose property the road goes. So look, and that's all depicted in this slide. That's just a set of a context. Turning to slide 4. In 1989, we created the conservation area, which includes 15.6 acres of the Indian Island Company property. And that's all the property that's basically below Susan Stephanopoulos' house, Nicholas' house, and what some people think of as the Sand Valley House. That is below those property lines. All of the company property is now in conservation easement. It was divided between a private portion, which is the end of the hook, where the boathouse is, and a publicly accessible portion down to the public access. And as you see there in the bullet points, and I highlighted a couple of the things about the goals, and there's a lot more detail. It was to preserve the undeveloped state for wildlife habitat and open space, protect the scenic views of the property and of the bay in both directions, both from the land and from the sea. Continued availability of pedestrian and vehicular access. Parking on a portion of the property to accommodate access to the sandbar and to the and then having that property be accessible for recreation, nature observation, and education. Those are high level parts of what the purposes were. The actual recorded easement was in a package that came out for this meeting. The next slide is the companion agreement. The first one we touched upon is the agreement between the company and the land trust as the holder of the easement. This slide on slide 5 is the road maintenance agreement, which followed a couple years after, but was contemplated in the design of the easement, that there would be an agreement with the town. And that's about the road. and its purposes would deal with the reality that the land is crossed by the private road at any point, which is used for access from the paved road to the same and to get across the road. Clarifying who has what use and what responsibility was a goal of that. On the right-hand side of this slide, side of this slide are some bullet points that were an effort to capture succinctly the key terms that are in that road. The Indian Point Road continues to be privately owned. The company grants to the town a public easement. And the town maintains the road as a public easement down to the access point, which is a specifically defined place. And that the town construct a parking and turning area for up to 5 vehicles down there, and that the maintenance of the public easement will be performed at no cost to the company. And that this agreement will continue so long as according to the terms. So that was the design of the agreement that was put in place. Which brings us 20 years in the future. And these two pictures are just two out of many. That, and so those of you who have walked down there as recently as today, you can see that how much the erosion there is. Both these pictures are taken looking uphill. The one on the left is at a place where there's the greatest road encroachment. And I would observe that that's a combination of freshwater erosion coming downhill and across the road and washing out the road, and wave action from wind at high tide. The problem is not what happens at low tide, that's what happens at low tide. It's at high tide, and particularly if there's a blast of wind from the south. That's the thing that causes, and some of you have seen videos, I think, that it opened to a storm, which is pretty impressive to see what happens if you have that perfect storm combination of tide and wind and direction. And then you see on the right-hand slide, that there used to be two access there at the turnaround. It's not there anymore. So the reality has, we are there. Climate change affecting us is not something that could happen. It's something that has happened. By the same token, the road has been there a long time. And the efforts to have there be a sustainable road have worked pretty darn well for a long time. If you took a photograph from 100 years ago today of what the physical features of Indian Point are, it'd be almost exactly the same as it is today. It's the same road, it's the same boathouse, it's the same pier, it's the same. The shape of the dune is different. The shape of the keel of the boat is different. That's today's reality. So for us, speaking on behalf of the company, our goal is to collaborate with the town and with the land trust to preserve what we created for both the Shadi community and landowners and the members. We have realities in front of us that are different than they used to be, and that requires us to be creative. But our goal is to preserve things that we think are important. Slide 8. We believe that the combination of what we just stepped through very briefly is that it is eroding, it has been eroding, and accelerating pace, and action is going to be taken very soon. All kinds of access. And that we see there really are three paths from the standpoint of the partnership that has existed between the town and the company. And the first path is to fulfill the existing agreement. To take steps to restore the road so that it can function in the way that it used to. How to do that, the technical approach that would be the wisest would have to be figured out. And the investment that the town would have to make would have to be mobilized to support that. We think if that were to be the choice, that needs to be pursued very urgently. Or it's getting more expensive by the week. On the other hand, that's not the only option. Another option is to say, this is probably not a sustainable investment, or not an investment that we feel is prudent anymore. And then therefore, the better course of action is to close out the road and adopt what you could think of as being the Deer Point model, where there is a privately maintained road over the property out to the conservation easement area at the end. And the public has access, but the access is pedestrian access. And the town isn't responsible. Private owners are responsible for maintaining the road as much as they feel able to do and choose to do. And it's another bumpy road. We've been out there lately, but that's a choice. And we, the owners of the company, talked about this fork in the road. And Phyllis and I shared with them the kind of framing that we were hoping to present to you tonight. Make sure that we had kind of buy-in for these options. These things that we could say, yeah, we're on it. You know, formal decisions, it's votes of the shareholders, just like the town. But we wanted sort of a general recognition where we are. So those are two choices. And then on slide 9, there's also, you know, another possibility, which is to close out the current agreement, as we just talked about, and then brainstorm about what you might do. And I can think of a dozen theoretically possible things that you could do. You could have a completely new road alignment from the main road that went on a different path. You could do a lot of different things. But the benefits of those things and the costs and the risks and how sustainable they are would all be specific to what those ideas are. If there was going to be such a thing, maybe what in our view would be to honor the Indian Point is special to a lot of people. We need respect for property owners because it's private property. And it would require support in promoting the goals of conservation and easement, which is a permanent dedicated easement. That is binding on the company, and our hope is to fulfill those terms. It would be the agreement for the town, the company, and the interest. And I think it's fair to say that any conceivable agreement that could be agreed to would need to be mutually beneficial. And it need to be seen to be mutually beneficial because of the people that have to make the decisions of this stuff. I know that we look through the history that the existing conservation easement and the existing road took a lot of years. It's complicated, there's lots of stakeholders, so I think we not be aware as we look at that. So that we see these as being the three forks in the road. And given the erosion, we think it's quite urgent that the choice be made. We've said, as between continuing the responsibilities under the current road agreement, if it is the decision of the town, if you don't want to do that, we're going to say, okay. We don't want that to be a subject of legal dispute. That, you know, the Deer Point option is an option that we believe is one that we need to be able to support with respect to the town. But we understand this is not an easy decision. We will respect the decision. And we will continue to do our best as a school to preserve everything that we care about. So that's the last of the conference slides. So now, if there are questions that you want anyone to like to address the cost, I will probably try to do with those.
have presented the three options. I would agree, those are the three realistic options, and I appreciate that. I guess one thing that I've heard repeatedly from Indian Island is the urgency of the road because of the erosion. And I guess I just don't quite understand why you feel that way and what's behind the urgency on your end.
The road is closed today. It's been closed recently, and that's never happened before. More than 120 years since the building out of the road occurred in County 3. We have had to curtail not only public use of the road by vehicles, we've had to curtail our own use of the road by vehicles. And we've got facilities down on the end of Indian Point that can't continue to exist if you can't maintain them. So the road is important as a way to get to the physical structures. And that's quite apart from the part that has to do with public access. So there's a sort of a private motivation, if you will, but there's also the risk aspect. And I think your question is a good one. I am very worried that people who are not intimately familiar with the shape and circumstance down there are going to get hurt because they're going to be, visitors don't go away. Are going to think, I'm going to go to the beach. And, it gets dark. You could do yourself very serious injury if you went over that ramp behind the boat. More help if you're in a car. So that we think that the closure of the road formally, officially, is simply a necessary action in response to the risk. And that therefore we've got to figure out a solution. So that risk doesn't continue. And that even if it's only the private users, the road's not usable now.
Is Indian Island considering making some repairs to the road? No?
Well, if it were the decision of the town to choose, for example, the Deer Point, and tell us that that's what we would do, then we would have to sit down and we would sit down and say, well, okay, if we no longer are in this shared situation, what do we think about this range of choices, given we're trying to address a different set of needs, so that we would no longer be worrying about the fan from the should begin as being a relevant consideration.
Is one of your goals to maintain vehicle access to the boathouse?
Yes.
Yes. We need vehicle access to the boathouse if we're going to continue to have it.
Keep it going.
And that's your plan right now, is to maintain vehicle access to the boathouse. I just want to understand, because there are other options there.
I think I would just make the slight change. I wouldn't use the word plan. It would certainly be our goal.
Okay.
To maintain access. Whether there's a realistic plan, I don't think we know the answer.
We've had internal discussions, and I think in attachment 2, there's actually some slides that we've been sharing with Indian Island Association and the company. But we were looking for the partnership with the town. Carolyn's seen where that played out, but we have members that they're willing to step up and maybe finance, and then we have folks that don't want to spend any money on it. So 28 owners, 60 members of the association, so we have varied opinions ourselves that we would have to work through. Is there a definite plan to fix it? No, but if the town chooses not to stay involved, we will sit down as an organization and figure it out.
And I guess the other comment that I forget you made it earlier, but Bo made it in the April meeting, is I think the town the town envisions their responsibility to be road maintenance, as if, maybe adding some gravel and grading yellow line in front of the road. I mean, that is beyond the scope of what we think the town envisions.
So 2018, we prepared a package to the town to put together by Rob Halpin, who's the president of Indian Island Company. David did some drawings for it, and it indicated right where the bulkhead started, and we put the big rock 5 years ago, that we were starting to have some serious erosion problems there. And we have been bringing it to the town's attention fairly regularly for the past 5 years, as it has continued to eat away on us. So there's documentation, there's letters, and so it's something that's been on the table for 5 years.
I guess what I'm trying to say, and whether it's clear, is that the town is not responsible for preventing erosion down at the hook. We are responsible, if the way I read the agreement, our responsibility is for maintaining the actual road wherever it may be, maybe it's been moved. But that's, I think at the April meeting, that was Bo's point, and I agree with that. And so I think that, I think that's an important, to me, that's an important distinction. And, I think there are many options for, the path forward, including removing all the structures that are down there right now and returning the beach to its more natural condition. And, because you're going to continue to get that kind of erosion with the overtopping on the structures. So, so that's just a point I think that
Yeah, I think I think we need to keep it more contained to questions instead of trying to brainstorm.
okay,
ideas
well,
or
I just, when I heard the presentation, I just wanted to distinguish between maintenance and kind of rebuilding and erosion prevention and control. I see maintenance as grading and, maybe adding some gravel, but not rebuilding.
Any other questions? Yes.
Oh, well, when you asked the question, Carol, about what was the emergency, I guess I heard you, in response to another question, say that if something wasn't done pretty quickly, and if we were planning on doing something, there was going to be this heightened and more emergent erosion in the areas that exist now, if there was a plan to actually go ahead and do something in the area that is already eroded, that, it's eroding really quickly and it's eroding very fast in the area that's in that one area. I think you said that. So to me, the reason for the emergency is not you getting to your boathouse. It's the fact that it's eroding at such a rapid rate. And if we want to do something about it, I'm not saying we should, there's a reason to do at least some remedial efforts now. Did I misunderstand you in saying that?
Yeah, I didn't say that erosion is necessarily an emergency, because erosion by itself isn't a problem. It's when we have things in the way of erosion that's a problem.
Yeah.
But I mean, there is no doubt that the rate of erosion has increased anecdotally, at least. We haven't monitored it beyond 3 years, but anecdotally it has increased over the long-term trend pretty significantly over the last 3 or 4 years.
Thanks.
I put a clarification in there. There was actually a document that was included in the package that went out to everybody. That was a site visit that was made in May of 2021 with Maine DEP. And I met the gentleman that was there with Ted and with several other town folks. Talked over the emergency measures that we would take to repair and just to kind of arrest some of the erosion. And he commented that if we didn't do it quickly, we were going to lose. So I forget what his name was, but the notes are in the package. Yes, he went out with us. I wasn't there, but Ted was, and walked the site and told us these are the things that you could do emergency wise, and you better get on it because it's so.
Things that can still be done.
Yes. That'll be more of it. More.
I just wanted to bring up two questions. Nighttime access, we live on the road, we see people going down. Drinking or not, doesn't really matter, but they're going down and, you know, midnight or whatever, and we are worried about, it doesn't say anything about nighttime access. I don't know what the right answer is, but it just says no vehicle access. So I think there needs to be some signage about what we're saying about nighttime to the public that isn't familiar from the hotel, or they're not familiar with the road. And number two is eventually, I would like to know what's the choice by the emergency crew? I mean, we've had fires down there, we've had people get injured, and we're the first house on the road, so they come to us, we call the fire department one time, we've also had people come knocking on our door because they're injured, so just in the future, we'd like to know what to say, what is our, do we call, do we not call, who would be available to help? I don't know exactly what they do on your point, but I just would like that clarified in the future, since there's a lot of people utilizing, visiting the area.
First of all, I'd like to say that I think that the book, and getting down to the book is very important to the community. I don't think it's something we do that well. Also, back when we had the Patriot Space storm, FEMA, the town worked with FEMA came in and did a repair that lasted for many years and held off the loss of the road, and we were able to utilize it. I can see now what's happening down below. We're probably not going to have 5 parking spots or any parking spots. I think the critical thing we need to deal with is the 2 or 3 places where the road is falling away. Get something there shored up, and hopefully it'll go for 5, 10, 20 years. It all depends on storms. It's a temporary, yes, it's temporary, sea rise going up, but I really feel the town has a responsibility. And I do believe we have a responsibility to keep that road maintained for the planners, the people that utilize the beaches. One of the only beaches we have that are public beaches on the island that have access for everybody. It's really only 2, I believe, maybe a little portion of Hamilton. The other thing about it is that for safety, and I also feel that the majority of the people really would like to see this taken care of. I know we had the vote. I think people voted against it because of the report. We should have written it differently. We should have had it differently, and it should have just stayed to maintain the top of the road so the road doesn't give way, so we can get the road usage. And I think it would have passed if we had worded it that way and not aligned it with that report that we didn't even have a copy of until after the vote, probably. So I just think that was a critical time. I feel the town needs to take responsibility for that road.
I think this is not the time for comments. We've been mainly questions towards Indian Island, for the board of selectmen, for Pete, or the land trust. I think that's the time right now is for those questions. And then public comment. We'll
I'm
have some
sorry.
time after. No, it's fine. I just wanted to make it clear. Is there any questions? Herb?
Fed, we talked about the responsibilities of the easements, various easements involved in the street markets. Could you just explain how much of the currently proposed project area where we're talking about doing this work is within the town easement? How much is within the trust, and how much is in yours?
Are you talking about distances or money?
I'm talking about the footprint of the easements versus where the proposed project is going. How much of it is within the town easement?
Well, the easiest way for me to answer that is that the access point is defined in the conservation easement is at the end of the publicly accessible point. And that's the place that has historically always been the place that people go off the road to go around the sandbar. And the portion that's the publicly maintained portion is back up the hill. And I believe that really all what we're talking about is up until you get back to the ledge. And that just about 500 feet.
But I'm asking about the proposed project that Barney Baker's designed and that we voted on, and the proposed solutions that we're all talking about, whether it's shoe wall or live, how much of that, those proposed projects fall within the 110?
I think the answer to that is that if you look at the existing conditions, repairs have to be made all the way along. They take a different form of what the repairs would need to be. So that because of the elevations, down closer to the access point, it's very low. And so that there's no reason to build a wall. What you gotta do is to prevent the waves from washing out the road. Whereas further back, you need to have something that deals with the height above the road. So that I think if you look at what's been proposed, it's depicted in different segments that are simply based on the height that you're trying to do.
Can I add, in the executive summary that was posted in the package that went out to everybody, there's a table that shows repair work all the way to the boathouse. It's divided up into three. There's the Raymond matching money, there was the town money, there was Indian Point money. So Barney Baker's plan actually took it all the way to the boathouse. And so we had this Indian Island, the section that was our responsibility, and then the town section from the public turnaround parking area back to where the boat is.
So the easement then is shore to shore, the whole dune is the town's easement? Or is it just?
The town doesn't, the public easement, that's okay, now let's be sure we're having the right. The public easement is defined in the agreement with the town is an easement over the road.
Right.
It is only the width of the road
Right.
down to the access point. And it goes down, if you look at that handout on slide 2, it goes down to that access point. So, and that everything beyond that is a
Right.
non-public.
So
road.
to be clear, the proposed project is outside the town easement. The project that we're proposing to spend public funds on is not within the town. It's on private property or within the land trust.
Well,
Is that true?
it's all private property.
It's not a private road.
You understand,
I think I understand.
what Herb is mentioning is how wide is our easement, which is stated in here, it's 18 feet for the first 168 feet. And then on the bottom, the unpaved parking and turnaround for 5 conventional passengers shall be constructed by the town at the access point. I don't know what it says, I'm assuming that, and then it says in the front, public easement in the current unpaved state, but only after first crowning it out to the width of 11 feet. More or less, the right of way is 25 feet with the improved portion extended no further than 18 feet. Ditches will be maintained on both sides.
So it's a private
So it's essentially, I believe what Herb is asking, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, he's saying basically where the road is eroded and basically where the wall is, where we're all talking about. How much is that is the town's responsibility?
Well, I think you have to measure, you have to measure the dimensions. And I think that, really the question is, what do you have to do on the ground to preserve, maintain the road that's described? At the moment, the road is washed out. There's a cones out in the middle of the road. And so you got to do something that's outboard of that so that you preserve the road. And if somebody can think of a way to do that, that doesn't involve, that doesn't involve pilings or it involves a different kind of technical solution. I don't think there's anything in this agreement that says the piling wall has to be built. There just has to be a solution that preserves the road.
I'll let you follow up.
My question goes to Pete's comment about one of the board items is foundation. And how do we decide who pays? You're suggesting that it's the town's total responsibility, even though it's outside of the easement. It's the town's total responsibility to build to protect all that, even though it's not within our. Spending public money on private land is not something you just do. It takes, it takes decisions and it sets precedents and it, that's all.
Just very quickly, are you allowing certain vehicles to access down through to your boathouse now? I assume?
Or only under sort of authorized circumstances. So the general rule is we're not doing, like, for example, our car has not been to the boathouse.
Yeah, and I agree, those two washed out areas are pretty dangerous now and should probably at least be better barricaded off or marked off by the town and or Indian Island for even pedestrian access. I also agree with the comment about night access for people with that current conditions. It's not really cool for the town or Indian Island to allow. So probably we should consider some modifications of the existing signage and policy in cooperation with each other. That's all I have. Thank you.
Those are great points, Mark. We have use of guidelines for the membership, and they're not supposed to be down there in the dark with any kind of vehicle. We have a waiver of liability that they sign if they are to come down. And we're encouraging members and owners not to use the road.
Steve?
To comment to that, Phillips and I have also worked together, and as of this week, Public Works installed posts on either side of the top of the road that were paved by Indian Island, and there's going to be a chain that's going to go across it with a sign on it that was purchased by the company saying authorized vehicles only, do not park in front of the driveway. So that will probably help deviate nighttime drivers down there who are trying to get down there, because there will be a natural metal, chain across it.
It was installed this afternoon.
It's there.
Hopefully it goes in the dark.
It does. It does. There's a sign there that's wrapped, and we've got reflectors on it. It was put in this afternoon.
Bob?
Just a further point in terms of the exposure. Today, I was down there this afternoon after that was erected. There were 2 hotel bicycles that went through the pedestrian access, and the hotel bicycles rode all the way down to the former parking area. Walking down there is dangerous enough. Being on a bicycle is dangerous enough, but being on a hotel bicycle, I don't mean to make fun of it. I mean, it's a real exposure.
It's been a real challenge to control the traffic from the hotel. We'll do everything we can. Signs, David was ordering some today. There'd be a big sign at the top. And we will do everything we can to keep them out of there.
That might
Sit
be
at
a
the top of the
conversation
chair.
worth having with the hotel,
Yeah.
so they can educate their.
We've had to do that before. Thank you for the heads up.
I just wanted to ask, Indian Island, when I first came on the board, and this, when I first, got involved in hearing about the problems down there, I was told over and over again that you as a group would not consider relocation of the parking, upland just a little bit on the flat spot, or any other ramps or pedestrian access down to the beach, maybe across the ledges or something like that. And wondering, is that still how you guys feel?
Well, that deserves a careful response. And I think the answer is that we frame the third option to acknowledge that there could be different ideas. Whether those ideas would be supported would depend on what they were and what the pros and cons were. Some of those, the potential from sort of a physical perspective came up when we had the site visit 14 months ago with Maine DEP. That, you can see that there's some things that that are worth at least recognizing as a possibility. For example, that the parking area is right in the narrowest part of the distance. You know, you said before, could you swing it around the curve of the ship of the cove so that you weren't trying to have both the road and the parking in the place that's most vulnerable? You know, the issue there has to do with the permitting process about the coastal wetlands and the freshwater wetlands. And do you have enough space in between? I think possibilities like that could be explored, you know, that could take. I don't want to rule out any idea, but I do want to say that ideas have to be ones that people can view as being a success on both sides.
Stephen?
So, I spoke to our town attorney about where we stand with the agreement, and for such changes that Jen just stated, the first thing that would need to be done is the public access easement would need to be rewritten, and for that to be approved, it would have to go to town meeting approval. So that's kind of the level of involvement that any of those changes would require.
Well, it would be, I would assume it would be 3 parties, right? It would also be the land.
Yes. Yeah, so all 3 parties would need to approve, and town approval would be kind of the ultimate that would make it all.
So can I ask a follow-up? So would you consider moving the parking upland somewhat? There is that flat area there that seems to be accessible. It's up from that area there. Is that something that would be on the
I
table?
want to make sure that we're all having the same conversation. One possibility is to swing the parking lot as close as it can be to where it was originally around the shore of the cove.
I'm talking more
I know
upland.
you are, and I'm
Yeah.
saying that's a different possibility. Some people, I believe, have talked about the possibility of having parking that's just immediately below Andrea and Susan's houses.
It's not really immediately below. It's actually a little further down there.
So and my answer to everyone who's asked me that question is, I think anyone who wants to think about that, first thing you need to do is to go sit down with those property owners who's
Of course,
the most effective.
of course.
That would need to happen before I can imagine the company to entertain such a idea.
Just to follow up, Maine DEP we looked at that site. We actually, we walked up there and we're like, what about this, doing this? Wetlands. So to get a permit for that special type of, I can't remember what he called it specifically, it would be difficult.
Yeah. It's a new permitting process.
Yeah.
You were there.
Yeah.
On that tour,
So,
and maybe leave you out.
Bob.
I hear, Phyllis, you intend to speak to the need for vehicular access to the boathouse, obviously for use as well as to maintain it, okay, and be able to retain that structure. When you talk in those terms, is it 24/7 access? And the reason I say it is there's currently vehicular access between, say, Great Island and Little Island, but you better drive over the bar from the top. So are you envisioning a similar level of access that you currently have? Or are you also considering other alternatives, be it restricted title access, which would still allow some degree of a full-size vehicle to and from the boathouse?
Yeah, that's a good question. And one of the things that we included in the backup slide package is a sort of a sketch that talks about different levels of service of a road. You know, there's a road that's maintained in condition where it can be a public road. And then you can have like the airplane model where you have something that's a lower standard, or you could say, this is really only going to be accessible to ATV type struck, much lighter weight, able to go over this. And I think the issue of time limits, I mean, we're already in a situation, the lowest part of the Union Point Road is in the private section down.
Certainly.
And so that's underwater at any key time. And so that we are already dealing with some of that restriction of time availability. And so we're no longer in a world where people can just assume I can always drive there. And I think your points well made.
We were down at midnight a couple nights ago, the night of the high tide, 11th south tide. David and I, Jay Morse, were down with our flashlights looking at where exactly the water was. And it was flat, there was no wind. And it was interesting, we marked off where those, and on the way to the boathouse, it was really, really deep and underwater, almost from the curb to where we cut our grass. And it was that low. So we were measuring and seeing where things were.
I mean, it's been brought up, but I just wanted to mention that it's private property, because I hear a lot of people say, oh, there's a lot here, but that is private property, that you would have to cross, so I think it's just worth saying, the wetlands, property issues, it's not an easy answer to figure out what do you do.
That was the point of this sketch, because when you come off the road, you are going down to 5 different properties. And then you get down to conservation.
The Phillips are those 5 property owners, all members of the.
Yes. Yes, they are.
So if there are no other questions, we'll move over to the land trust if they have anything to say.
I just have a couple comments. The first thing that I want to say, and I think we all really need to remember, is that in 1999, the Indian Land Corporation gave to Shabir an incredible gift. They gave to the people of Shabir this amazing, amazing asset, this wonderful place that everybody has used and loved. And we really owe them an incredible debt of gratitude. And I think that's lost in this discussion. And I really think we need to remember that. And it is a place that is just absolutely a key part of the lives of so many on the island. And I think, arguing about who's going to pay for what and whether it's in the legal documents or not, I think we're forgetting what it has meant to the people of Shabir. And as trustees, Penny and I were talking about that today. We were down there today, standing up there and saying, "Wow, what a gift this has been," and bemoaning what's happening to it. And it's really not our place to decide who should pay for it and who shouldn't pay for it. But it is our duty as a trustee to try to make it available to as many people as possible. And that's the problem with taking away the access by vehicles. Because what that means is that people with disabilities or older people or people with kids are going to find a much harder place to visit. And it then becomes more exclusive. It's not easy to get down there. I mean, we walk down there and we're kind of huffing and puffing coming back up there, and we're young. And my husband has a disability, and I know he could not make that road anymore. So I think from a perspective as a trustee, I think we really want you to examine taking away that access, because it's going to affect the use of a lot of people on the island. We have an aging population. We do. We have most of Shabir citizens are older. And so that is our comment. We want to be at the table as much as we can. We feel so proud to be the holders of this easement. And I know it is a very, very difficult thorny issue, because who expected us to be sitting around a table talking about how difficult climate change has affected this gem. But I really think for walking away from this table, I would hope that you could come to some consensus about how Indian Island and the town could work together on some issues that could try to preserve some vehicular access down there, because I think it's really important for a lot of people that live on Street. That's all we have to say. We're happy to answer any other questions.
All right, there any questions from the board, Indian Island, or the public, or the land trust? Okay.
So one of the proposals back in April was to do a large scale, one way to totally stabilize the shoreline, which would allow you to maintain the road, potentially vehicle access, is to build a significant wall, a lot of riprap, on the beachfront that would extend, about $1 million and extend even further than the current bulkhead does. And with the land trust, would that be an acceptable solution to the land trust to armor the entire beachfront so that the road access is maintained?
Well, we would have, the land trust would have to approve any plan, so we would have to be presented with something to review, which we haven't, and we would have to make a determination.
Well, I just
As a
mean
board.
sort of philosophically, armoring the entire shorefront so you do maintain the road access was presented at the meeting as an option, potential future option. In other words, I think the term that was used was a permanent or, long-term solution would be, as Steve had mentioned, sort of an armor hardening of the shoreline. And when I read the easement and kind of the goals of the easement and maintaining the system in a, the habitat and the access, I guess that's a question I have for the land trust. Because when I hear that to me seems like we are in our attempt to stabilize the road with a structural feature like that, we're kind of losing the beach. And so I think that is also a trade-off that we have to consider, is how much, man-made intervention do we want to have down there to maintain our vehicle access, which ultimately will go away. It's just a matter of when. I mean, sooner or later, already the road is flooded at a very high tide. So, that is going in only one direction. So I guess my philosophy is, can we step back and really look at a long-term solution that still maintains the natural character or maybe even enhances the natural character of the beautiful beach system that's there. And if it was up to me personally, I'd yank out all the man-made structures that are there right now and try to adapt to a natural system. That's just a question that's been on my mind, because I think we've seen that happen in other beach systems where particularly when there are homes that are at risk, there's a lot of armoring that goes on, and that in a way, to me, takes away from the natural character of the system. So that's where, when I read the easement and kind of the objectives of the protection for all of us, not just the land trust, I'm finding that everybody involved, I think that is something we have to weigh. And when Barney mentioned that at the meeting, I was kind of horrified at the thought, not that he mentioned it, but horrified at what that might look like. So, to me,
Well, I think that's a really good point. I think obviously your comments about it, just your very, very astute comments about the whole idea of the riprap and just moving the sand around to a place that it's not going to be anyway, are really good ones. I got a good geological lesson from you, and I really appreciate it. If that's the only solution, and we haven't really studied it, I think we like to. I would hope that there would be other solutions. That can't be the only possible solution. And perhaps maybe the solution for the road is to try to protect what's there for now, but have some type of road and even have, this is gonna sound completely like off crazy, but have the ability to take people down there with four-wheel vehicles that are waiting to take elderly people down to the beach. It sounds like a crazy system, but you know, there's different ways to skin a cat. I mean, you know, if people can't get down there on their own 2 feet, we have ways of ferrying people down there. But I mean, I really don't like the idea of getting rid of the access for people who least can get down there, because it's just not the young that should be able to enjoy that resource. And I would hate to walk away from this meeting without some consensus that we continue to talk about ways of solving the issue and not coming to a, you know, oh, the road is only, you know, this long and therefore, you know, this wide, and therefore we're not responsible for the edges because, you know, we're, you know, we only promised to do the road bed. I mean, let's face it, this is an important resource for the town. It's been used by so many people. It's key to the existence, in my opinion, of the island. And I don't think we should walk away from the meeting without some kind of, at least the ability to continue to talk about it. And nor do I think the town should pay for it.
Any other questions?
Just very quickly, I don't know if vehicle access will continue down there. Some talks need to continue between the town, the Indiana Corporation, and One Trust. There's no doubt about it. I'm assuming, knowing the quality of our rescue and fire squad, that they have some plans of how to get down there in more ways than one. There's some sort of a rescue call or an incident, like land, water, or even air. But right now we are liable if we're allowing public access to Deer Point and, you know, in any other area to try and respond in at least one form. So I'm assuming that the Shebig Rescue has thought about that with the current condition of that road, because there's no way that new rescue or that old rescue would be down through that sand. I walked down through there today. That sand, once you get past that little part, that sand like that deep. So you're not gonna drive a two-wheel vehicle through that with much success. So, but I agree, these talks need to continue. I appreciate the generosity and the patience of the landowners and the neighbors and all of the Indiana Corporation people and the patience of the town thus far.
All right, so I'd like to, if there are no other questions, I'd like to move on to the public talks. So I had comments, please. So if you have any comments, other questions to anybody else? No.
I have a question, I guess it would be directed to you, Carol. What would your plan be that would allow people who were not physically able to get them down to?
I don't know. I mean, I think, personally, I think moving, I think trying to fight Mother Nature down there on this low-lying beach is not a good approach. And I think that, you know, I think providing a walkway that may be accessible down to the beachfront is an option that we could consider. I mean, there are plenty of places in, on the California coastline, pretty extreme environments that they still provide access for, and I think we could get creative and consider something like that.
So if
I
you're,
mean, so that's, I'm just talking off the top of my head, but realistically, I think we have to move that.
I really took it to heart, I think it was our emergency who spoke about basic planning there, his whole life, and certainly a lot of older islanders. They're not, and they can't, because they have to solve their plans. So that's one example, but then there are just older people who like to be able to be driven down, just to enjoy the view, they might not be able to get out of the car and go. I just think that that's something, and I've been here, I'm a very, very much short time on this island. I get to appreciate that in my house all the time, but not everybody does. And allowing people the ability to enjoy that space is, I think it's critical. I think it's just part of what this island needs to be.
I appreciate that perspective, but I also think that, when we consider the film here, we're also looking at significant adaptations there for the same reason in terms of climate change. I think we really, as a community, have to consider how we are going to adapt to sea level rise, increasing storms. And this is a good example of I think, a project that we could work together on to come up with the best solution that we can. It may not satisfy all our needs, but the reality is sea level is going to keep rising, erosion is going to continue, and I think we need to frankly face the music and work together to find a solution.
Any other comments?
I'd just like to say one more time that Diane hit was really great talking about the fact that people need to break down there and get back up. Our lives are temporary. This may be only a temporary situation for our lives, and whatever it is, I hope we can do something to make it so that people are able to get down there and get back up.
Any other comments?
My understanding of this workshop was a result of the referendum that the town voted. There was 128 to 92. So the town came forward with a proposal to repair the road. Am I correct or not?
Yes.
Correct. So you did your responsibility in presenting a proposal to repair the road. Whether it is a permanent thing or not, this is a natural disaster. You cannot predict what will happen. But Mr. Barrett and the Indian, to me, what my understanding is, they would like to have the road repaired. He gave us options, but he emphasized that the road has to be connected and repaired. That's my feeling, and I hope we could, all the organizations can come up with a solution that would be satisfactory for everyone. About parking or not parking, where it is, and private parks, that's irrelevant at the moment. The moment is to repair the road and make the connection safe for everyone.
All right. So my comment is to that. So the reason I personally did not go for Artie's plan was, it was, to me, seemed to be a temporary solution. There was no guarantee that that would last one storm, two storms, high tide, low tide. It was just an immediate fix. I couldn't see the town spending $120,000 on just an immediate fix, that the next day we could have a storm and it's gone. So the town just spent $120,000 on something that will disappear just as fast as it's put it. And the only thing I can think of is the town ready to put 120 $200,000 a year to repair Indian Island, the Indian Point. So the plan, I didn't vote for the money invested in it, it's not an issue. To me, it was not what I voted for, it was the plan. I wanted something more concrete than something that might last. So to me, it didn't seem financially responsible.
Just very quickly, back to Diane and the land trust comment. Has this board, or will this board, in our opinion, designate a couple of board members and the town administrator to work separately in between meetings with the Indian Island Land Trust, Indian Island Corporation, and possibly the Land Trust as well, to bring back some ideas for consideration for looking to move forward with some possible solves of our current access issues?
My thoughts are, I think that'd be an easier path. Probably something that would make more, we'd get more forward motion as a smaller group than we would be as a larger group.
Well, without offending this, because this is good, sometimes smaller groups can work independently in between larger meetings to bring back recommendations for consideration for the board and the public and the entities. Just my opinion.
So what's the board's thought on that? And then we'll move on to the.
I think you stated clearly earlier, we really can't take action tonight, it's public meeting. But I think it's incumbent on us to take action at our meeting.
Well, I mean, the thought is to,
Have a subcommittee.
do you want a subcommittee? What's your thought on that?
I absolutely think we should.
Okay. Any comments
Yeah.
about you?
Is my reaction to that? I'm looking at the clock too. Everybody's been so patient tonight, and I
Yes.
appreciate the sincere efforts that have gone into this. We have been dealing with erosion issues for the past 5 years. It's accelerating quickly. I feel a sense of urgency to address it and to not just keep kicking this can down the road. I would like to see a sincere commitment of the town to work out something, and I'm speaking for myself here, but as a member of Indian Island, we're starting all over again, it feels like. I mean, every time we've had a new town administrator, we've had a new board, we just keep stepping back and starting over. Meanwhile, the road is disappearing. I think 3 forks on the road are pretty clear, and I think we need to make a decision in the next month or two. Where are we on that, on forks in the road? We agreed to step away and we take it on our own, or there's a sincere commitment to work out something here. Bob, I thought the package that you sent out to us today, the article, was really excellent, and it talked about solutions that are gray and green combined. Bob circulated an article that was about St. Lawrence and some islands up there and what's going on. Pete, I think it's more than green. I think it's more than wind shorelines. I think there's got to be some hard infrastructure. And there's a lot of different ways we can skin this, but there's a sense of urgency that I personally feel that we cannot have another winter go by and still be talking about it. It's my personal opinion. Okay?
Sure. I think we've done our best to communicate just as transparently as we know how. That we think the choices in front of us right now. I totally understand that sense on the part of some people that said, this is not an investment that we are. All you gotta do is say so. That's okay. Or conversely, if there's values that you see that are worth preserving, then we just gotta work out the how. Something that's gonna be robust enough, so it's not gonna disappear amongst people.
So I I would propose that the select board have an agenda item at the next meeting to vote on path 1, path 2, path 3, as nicely outlined by the United Association. That sets the path forward for all parties involved. Once that vote is taken, there may be the need to add something if we chose path 3. Or there may not, but we can't have that vote tonight. We can have that vote. Correct. I think that's.
What are your thoughts on that?
If you can write a decision, I think that would do everybody a lot of good.
I would ask that the decision, if it is path 3, that it has a timeline on it, because I don't see another winter going through, just being the way it is. So if we do decide to go with 3, the town decides to go with 3, what is the timeline?
Well, and I think we should emphasize, we need to go back and step back. Path 3 says, we close out the current road, and then the company has to figure out what are we going to do to meet our own needs. It isn't that we wait and have more discussion, but then it could be. It's a plan pretty well.
Keep in mind that path 3 requires X number of meetings of collaboration to determine a solution. The town's participation in that solution more than likely will require town meetings to vote to approve it. Town meetings can be called in a relatively short period of time. We don't have to wait till next summer for that. But it's now July, so if path 3 is determined, that group needs to commit to meeting very frequently to move down the path quickly. Not a monthly thing. It's going to be all hands on deck in that direction.
Sure hasn't been a month.
We have put in so much time in dealing with this over the past year and a half. We're committed to doing whatever it takes. Absolutely.
Just to add to that, we too have put in an awful lot of time and asked over and over and over again at past meetings for information about Indian Point and to get something from Marty. And that was, I don't know how often we did that in last fall and through the winter. But we were asking all the time.
Marty's contract is with the town. We agreed to pay for half of it, but the contract is with the town.
Or just so you know, we did work to get some answers.
We provided any information that we were asked.
Absolutely.
So one more time, is there any comments?
No.
All right, so I want to appreciate, and I'm really thankful for the board to be here in Island. Indian Point, the land trust. Sorry about that. And all the public, thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thanks for coming. The presentation that Marty Baker.
No, that's okay. That happened. It's great to have you here. Thank you for making the time for us. Yeah.
Yeah.